Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to talk about When the Men Were Gone with author Marjorie Herrera-Lewis. If you have questions for Marjorie, please post them in the chat or the Q&A box, and we will get to them at the end of the program. So first, let me start with introducing Marjorie. Marjorie Herrera-Lewis knew early on that she wanted to be a sports writer. After several years at small newspapers, at age 27, she began working at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. 2 years later, she was a beat writer working with veteran beat reporter David Moore for the Dallas Cowboys. Throughout her career, Marjorie covered college and professional sports. She also holds a BS, MA, and MFA degrees. She says Arizona State prepared her to be a sports writer. The University of Texas at Arlington prepared her to be a university professor, and Southern New Hampshire University prepared her to be a novelist. She teaches media ethics at the University of North Texas. So welcome, Margie. We're so glad to have you. Would you like to start by telling us a little bit about yourself and the book?
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I've grown up a sports fan. I was born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to a mother and a father who just passed their love of sports on to me. I can tell you this, if my dad had his way, he's 93 years old now, my mom's 89, but if my dad had his way, I would not have been a sports writer. I would be pitching for the Cubs, or maybe the Cardinals, yeah. Yeah, and my mother, she can, she lives here, they both live here in Santa Fe. I'm visiting them, so I'm in town, and she could tell you the starting lineup for the University of Rhode Island. So the apple just didn't fall far from the tree. I grew up loving sports. I played everything that was available to me as a young girl growing up in the 60s and 70s. And I just knew at an early age that I wanted to be a sports writer because I couldn't pitch for the Cubs and I couldn't be a quarterback in the NFL. So the best thing I could do was be close enough to the game by sitting in the press box. And so that's what I've done. I worked at a few small newspapers in Arizona and Texas before getting to the Star-Telegram, and then later the Dallas Morning News. And then now I do freelance work. And then, of course, wrote the novel, and I'm working on another one. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
So so everybody can see the book. So can you talk about how you came across this story and why you knew you had to tell it?
Well, it was pure serendipity. That's how I came across the story. I don't know if you can tell in my voice, but I have allergies and I've had them for a long time. So I was going to this allergy doctor in Bedford, Texas, and for 23 years, imagine that, for 23 years he was trying to convince me to take allergy shots, and I kept postponing it. No, I don't want to do it yet. I don't want to do it yet. Eventually, in the summer of 2011, I decided that my allergies were so bad that I had to just do more than just drops in a prescription. So I told him, okay, I'll get those shots. Well, for 23 years, I crossed paths with his nurse, Jean Van Waters. And I'm a t-shirt and jeans kind of person, but I don't know why, but I never wore a t-shirt for 23 years to the doctor's office. But one morning in that summer of 2011, I threw on a t-shirt to go get allergy tested, and the t-shirt said, the University of Tulsa football, my older daughter's alma mater. Well, I walk in, and Jean, who like I said, I crossed paths with for 23 years, she looked at me and she said, a woman who loves sports? Well, of course, in all those years, I never told her what my career was. And so I said, oh yeah, I love sports. And she said, so do I. All the women in my family love sports because it was passed on to us from my Aunt Tylene. And I was like, oh, okay. She says, yeah, she was a football coach. And I said, wait a minute. Your aunt was a football coach, her great aunt Tylene? She said, yes. And I said, where? And she said, Brownwood, Texas. And I asked her when, and she said, during World War II. And my head just started spinning. I mean, I was going to explode. So having had a career already as a sports writer and having covered the NFL and college football and for so many years, and then finding out that in the state of Texas, we had a high school football coach who coached during the war. It was this confluence of just a treasure trove of wonderful information. And so that's how I got it. And I've been so grateful for that day and that t-shirt.
So, since we've kind of started with this, can you talk a little bit more about what the book is about, and so that for those people who came to the author event before reading the book, they kind of get a good idea of what to expect?
Sure. Okay, so the book is based on a true story. It's a novel, but it's based on the true story of Tylene Wilson, who, of course, the title is When the Men Were Gone. So this is set during World War II. She stepped up to coach the football team. At that time, a lot of kids, and if you're all aficionados of history and that particular period in history, we know that a lot of young men that were 16 and 17 years old were signing up and serving in the war. Well, there's a backstory that I won't get into because I don't want to have a spoiler here, but there was a reason why, not only that she wanted to keep the boys home until they were men, she wanted them to finish their childhood. So she didn't want 16 and 17-year-old boys saying, well, there's no football, and I don't love school, so I'm just going to go and enlist. And so she wanted to keep them home. Boys do what boys do when they're young, then they become men, then you go to war. So so it's her journey. So this is a story about what was happening on the home front. It's set in 1944. It's what was happening here back in the States. Well, sons and husbands and brothers and fathers, we're all off to war. So she stood up. The other reason she wanted to do this is because, like every other town in the United States at that time, there was a lot of suffering. And so she wanted the town not to lose that Friday night when everybody can kind of cluster together. The football field is the largest gathering place in most cities for their community. And so she wanted them to have something joyful. Let's forget about the suffering and everything. And for just 3 hours on a Friday night, let's pull together as a community, cheer on the boys, and have something to celebrate. And so she was just an incredible person. But let me just mention real quickly, I did set out originally when Jean told me about her aunt that I was going to write a biography. But unfortunately, much of the story, the bulk of the story was lost to time. And the only way I could memorialize what she had done at that point was take what I knew to be true and then create a fictionalized account and write a novel so I could, her legacy could live on.
So I've read a lot of World War II books, but this is one of the few that focuses on what was going on at home and the toll that it was taking on families. Why did you decide to work that into the framework of the story? And why do you think it's important that people understand that what was happening in Europe and in Japan was important, but also what was happening here is important to remember as well?
Well, that's a great question. And the reason I decided to work that in is because it was the whole war was the reason why she stepped up. And so I had to show what was happening. I felt like it was important to show what was happening and why it was so important to her to step up. So here's the thing. If I had written a biography, the story would have been set in 42. The story is set in 44, exactly for the reason that you're asking me. Pearl Harbor, of course, as we all know, occurred in December of 41. So by the fall of 42, we still hadn't seen the scope of what this country was going to experience. And once I knew I was going to be writing a novel, I decided to shift the story to 44 so I could include what the country was experiencing, the full scope. And so by that time, in 44, the country we were already having rationing. We were rationing, that as mentioned in the book about the Boy Scouts, they were having the scrap metal and they did that throughout the country, and they did that in Brownwood. So I wanted to show that people were contributing to the rubber shortage, to the metal shortage, to the paper and cardboard, and all these things that were used for the war effort. So if I had kept it in 42, all of that would have been missing. We hadn't gotten to that point yet. So a lot of the pieces in the story are actually based on what Tylene had told her family. So when I describe, for example, Ida Mae, we've got Tylene's friend as Tylene's driving up with Moose, and she sees the bicycles, the soldiers that were just leaving her friend's house, telling her that her son, his body would be coming home. I described the bikes in the way that Tylene had described them to her family. And so I researched to make sure it was accurate. And so I just thought it was important to show that piece where she would not have coached at all had it not been for the war. So I thought including the war and the home front was a big piece and an important part of the entire story.
So writing something that's true, but also kind of adapting that to be fictional requires lots of research.
Oh.
So talk about your research process and where you even went to get sources to do this.
Okay. You know, as a career journalist, I'm already accustomed to doing a lot of research, and it just runs in my blood. I love research. It's like going on a treasure hunt, and then you find a little piece and it's like gold and diamonds that you've just discovered, and it's really exciting. So what happened was, once I set out, but at that doctor's appointment, now remember, I'm talking to her grandniece, and I said by the time I left the appointment that I would like to write her story. So she had agreed to that. And that was a big piece for me. That was really important. So from the information and the research and in photos that I would have liked to have been included in the book, but they were not of publishing quality. So my first research, of course, was through her family. From there, I went to Brownwood, and my husband went with me. We went to Brownwood, and the city was so embracing and welcoming and wonderful. So one of the first things I did was I went out to the high school, and their principal out there, Mitch Moore, he made research the easiest thing I'd ever done, the easiest research I'd ever done. What he did was he set me up in the library with 2 librarians. I never even had to go stand up and go anywhere. I just sat there, and I would tell them what I needed, and they'd go dig it up, and they'd bring it to me. And what was beautiful is that there's a town historian there who, by the name of Dallas Houston. He also broadcasts the football games at the high school, and I was listening to him last night as they were playing Stephenville, of all people, of course, because I have that highlighted in the book. And Dallas, when I'd be looking at yearbooks or pieces of information, he'd say, well, they're still in town. I know how you can get a hold of them. I know, so he was fantastic. Then from there, I went to the public library, of course. We know public libraries are wonderful resources. I went to the Genealogy Society, just all these different places. But I'll tell you one thing, because you're saying not just where did I go, but how did I get it? Well, one thing that I do when I research, even whether it's a magazine article, a newspaper article, or now in this case, a novel, is I look for information that I know I'm not going to use in the book, because I don't know what it will give me, where it will take me. So one of the first things I did was I looked up Tylene's mother's and father's obituaries. And it was in her father's obituary that I discovered the Zephyr tornado. And it said that he died years later of injuries sustained in a Zephyr tornado. So that's what led me to that piece of the book. I wouldn't have found that or known that had I not researched her parents, their obituaries. And from there, I also researched, because Tylene was a principal for many, many years, from the 50s, 60s. She took over at one of the elementaries in the 40s. I researched newspaper articles where she was quoted so I could hear her voice. And the articles I was reading were from the 60s and 70s. It had nothing to do with the 40s and what I was writing about, but I could hear her speak. I could discover through those articles what was important to her. That she would bring in authors from Fort Worth to speak to students to encourage them to read. She would bring in theater groups from Fort Worth to entertain the students and encourage them to fall in love with the arts. I just found so much about her by reading her own words, even though they weren't even in the 40s. Because what I discovered in the 40s was there was a dearth of information, because again, we had not everything publishing, and so I had to hear her voice in subsequent decades.
I think a lot of people don't realize that even with fiction that's not based on true people, the amount of research that goes in, especially when you're talking about fiction that's set in a real time period, and that you have to kind of understand what was going on during that time period. So I always think it's really important to kind of talk about that, so that we kind of understand that while it is a lot of just sitting down and writing, there's a lot of behind the scenes sort of work that you have to do to get yourself prepared.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And so it wasn't just, well, first of all, my parents graduated from high school in the 40s. So I grew up listening to big band music and the Andrews Sisters and, Glenn Miller, and I loved it. And so when I knew I was going to write a book about the 40s, I tried to immerse myself in that decade, in that era. And so, one of the things is I wrote the novel originally in third person, and then I changed it to first person. And once I changed it to first person, I started working in the middle of the night because I could control my environment at that point. And I'm a night owl by nature anyway. So about midnight, I would sit at my computer at the kitchen table. My husband would be asleep. The dogs were asleep. My daughters in their own houses were asleep. I knew I wasn't going to get, and the whole world, it felt like the whole world was asleep. So what I did was I would sit at my computer. I put a picture of the real Tylene and John right next to my computer to the left. I put a mug of my alma mater on the right, full of coffee, and I kept it going all night. And I put on a brownwood leather jacket. And then I would occasionally turn on softly on my phone 40s music. I would listen to Glenn Miller or Tommy Dorsey or the Andrews Sisters, and I would send myself back into 1944. And then I would just, in first person, tell us all what I thought Tylene would tell us. So it wasn't just a matter of getting the research and sitting at the keyboard, but also just sending myself back to 1944. And I'll tell you what, I did this, I started doing this in 2014. And in the morning when the sun would come up, I would go out and get our newspaper and I'd open it up and it would say 2014. And I was like, whoa, when did that happen? I was so 1944.
I love that. So you shared a tidbit with us right before we started that I thought we should talk about next. So I hear that it's been optioned for a movie.
Yes, it has. This whole journey has just been unbelievable because, I hadn't even finished the book when HarperCollins bought it. And then I still hadn't finished it when it was optioned to film. So I had to hurry up and finish it. But I just got word yesterday that it's now, we've moved on with a different pair of producers. And I'm really excited about the team of producers that we're working with now. One of which was a part of the film Still Alice, that Julianne Moore won the Oscar for Best Actress. And she's the one that brought that film to the screen. And now she'll be the one to bring Tylene's story. And I couldn't be more thrilled. This is just so exciting. She's bringing this to be her next project. Her current project is already in post-production. So she's ready to go. We're ready to go and just get started. So I think we're closer to bringing it to the screen than I thought we were even just a month ago.
That's awesome. I really enjoyed this book, and I can already kind of see how it kind of visually could play out on a movie screen. So
Well,
I mean, I
thank
think
you.
it's
You know, that's the thing is ever since I started working on this book in grad school. You mentioned that I have a Master of Fine Arts, and actually that came about when I knew I had to write a novel instead of a biography, and I had no idea how to write a novel. And so I felt like in order to give Tylene her due, you know, I mean, I wanted to give her the best shot that I could. I didn't want to just wing it at the kitchen table. I went back and did a 60 credit hour master's program, and this was my thesis. So, so along those lines, the film, so everybody was asking me as they would read my work, and when the book first came out, they're going, "Oh, I see this as a movie," and but it's first a book. I hope you like the book.
well, let's be
everything
honest,
was movie, and I'm like, well, what about the book?
to be honest, the book is always better than the movie. They always
Well,
cut out your favorite stuff.
I know I'm worried about that, but
don't have a choice.
Yeah, they asked me though specifically to work with the writer, the screenwriter, and they did tell me that they want the book to be very little diversion. You know, they will divert very little from the book, and so I feel good about that, and that I'll be working with the writer. I mean, not to the level of getting a writing credit or anything like that, but I'll have input. So,
which
I'm excited.
Rarely happens. So that's actually an amazing piece for you to be able to actually kind of have discussions about how it should go. Yeah. So,
and we had already worked with another production company, and we already had a screenplay that I had worked with a little bit at that point. But all the stuff that I'm learning about how the film industry works and everything, you know, it's just like all new to me. And so I now we're moving to another group. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's great. I kind of want to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
Can you talk about being a female sports reporter in the 80s? I'm guessing it was not an easy path.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I did get some pushback, and so I'm at the time I was like, you know, what's your problem? But it helped me understand Tylene better, because can you imagine being a sports writer in the 80s versus being the football coach in the 40s? So the experiences that I had were actually helpful for me in the long run. It helped me understand Tylene. But when I was covering the Dallas Cowboys, I have to be honest, there were some times that it was difficult, but 99.9% of the time, the organization was very professional. The athletes were extremely professional. We had wonderful working relationships. So let me just kind of synopsize two situations that will give you this. Now, I'm at my first training camp in 1986, and it was all men, and I'm there taking notes, watching the first day of football practices when it was mostly rookies and free agents. The stars would be coming in, you know, a week later. And I'm taking notes on the field, and I'm going to write a little bit of a notebook on who I thought was going to have a shot at making the team and who was way in over their heads. They just didn't have a shot. And practice ends, and I'm walking back to my workstation at Cal Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California, where the team practiced. And I hear these cleats behind me. You know, everybody's heard cleats on concrete. So just imagine the clickety clack, and it's getting louder and it's getting closer. And I could tell it was only one person by the sound. And I thought, is somebody trying to catch up with me? So I slowed down, and I hear this guy come. I hear it. This guy in full practice uniform, carrying his helmet. He passes me on my left, and he stops, and he turns around, looks me in the eyes, and he says, "You don't belong here." And I looked at him, and I said to him, "Well, I just watched you practice, and I'm going to be here a lot longer than you are." You know, I was taking notes on who was in over his head, and he was one of them. Anyway, he was cut. I never saw him again. So that was that. But on another note, later that season, you know, that year, the Cowboys played the Chicago Bears in London, and it was the first time the NFL was playing in London. And I'll give you a real brief synopsis, but this gives you an idea. When the game was over, the British police, the British Bobby, he would not let me into the locker room. And Tom Landry comes out and says, "Marjorie, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, he won't let me in the locker room." And all the men were already in the locker room doing interviews and everything. And I'm just standing there going, what am I going to do? They paid me to come out to Europe and I can't even talk to them after the game. And so Tom Landry looks at the British Bobby and he says, oh, it's okay for her to come in. She's one of us. And I'll never forget that Tom Landry saying she's one of us. I'm like, can you write my paycheck? But the British Bobby looks at Tom Landry and says, she might be one of you in the United States. She is not one of you here. And he wouldn't let me in. So a little bit later, Mike Renfro, he was a wide receiver. He had also played at TCU, All-America and everything. Great guy. He came out and he says, who do you need to talk to? I gave him a list of, Too Tall Jones, Randy White, Tony Dorsett, Danny White. And Mike goes in the locker room, brings the guys out to me. And at one point he said, the Bears are getting ready to leave. They're already on the bus. Who do you need to talk to? So I was like, well, how about Jim McMahon, Refrigerator Perry, and so Mike goes on the opposing team's bus and gets the guys out and brings them to me to interview. So that's a good example of the wonderful working relationship and mutual respect. And so for those, you don't belong here. So every one of those, there were 100 of the respect, and it was a fabulous, fantastic experience.
I love that. And I just want to remind our listeners, if you have questions, to go ahead and post them in either the chat or the Q&A box. So what made you decide that you wanted to coach? And how
Tylene did that.
And how were you able to join the coaching staff for Texas Wesleyan?
Okay, yeah, doing all the research about Tylene's life and then creating this novel around what I knew to be true, she completely inspired me. That's the only reason. I never thought that I would ever be a football coach. But I felt like, the more I learned about Tylene and how she was such a student of the game, I started thinking, well, I'm a student of the game. And so I would never have done it had I not known of Tylene's story. And so I reached out to Texas Wesleyan University. They were just launching their football program. The season that I helped them out in 2017 was their first since 1941, when they had won a share of the conference championship, and then Pearl Harbor happened, and the team got together and just said, let's serve our country. And Wesleyan didn't have a football team anymore until 17. So I reached out, and they needed a lot of volunteer coaches, most of their staff, because of lack of funding. Yeah. And so the bulk of the staff was volunteer, and I was among them. And so I was assigned to work with linebackers and defensive backs. And I worked with a wonderful, wonderful human being, Quincy Butler. He was the position coach that I assisted. And working with Quincy could not have been better. If I ever do coach again, and there's a very good possibility that will be happening down the road, I would love for Quincy to be part of that coaching staff. But like with the Cowboys, there was some pushback on the coaching staff, not from the team. The team, I discovered that young men are much more open to having a female coach if they know that she can make them better. And so I didn't have any issues with the young men. A couple of the coaches maybe didn't see things the same way, but Quincy was fantastic.
So we have a question from an audience member in reference to the "you do not belong here" comments. What do you recommend to young women who are interested in sports writing in order to keep going and not give up?
Oh, that's a great question, and thank you. I would say that the best thing to do is to be prepared. Like I said, in coaching, student of the game, I did that as a sports writer. I learned everything that I could to be knowledgeable of the games that I already loved, but wasn't able to play because they weren't available to me. And so I always had to have that pushback. When I did radio shows, for example, people would say, but you didn't even play football. Well, you know what, so what? You can cover the governor's mansion without having been governor. Or the governor's administration, not the mansion, but I'm sure the mansion is great too. But so I would say be prepared, and don't worry about doors that will close, because doors will always open. I have discovered, because I started doing this very young, and I was a Cowboys beat writer when I was still in my 20s. And I look back at pictures like that, and I was like a baby, and still I was prepared. And so I would encourage women, and not just as sports writers, but in any area that has been dominated by men, that if you want to do it, prepare yourself and do it. There is nothing that will keep you from doing it if you're well prepared and you're not worried about taking no for an answer, because there will always be a yes.
I love that. So you said you were working on something new. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm working on another novel. Now, if I give you the very broad explanation, you're going to think I'm writing the same novel again. It is so different. But it is based on a woman and football and in Texas. But I'll go further, and this is where it differs. You know, Tylene was in her early 40s when she coached. Well, this novel is also going to be historical fiction based on a true story of the year Mamie Eisenhower lettered in college football in San Antonio in 1916. That's what this one is about. She was a newlywed. She was 19. Dwight was 25, and this covers their first 3 or 4, I'm not sure yet because I'm still working on it, but their first fall, and he was coaching at St. Louis College, which is now St. Mary's University, and she lettered that year. And so when I discovered she lettered, I knew I had a story, and that's what it's going to be. Can you believe that? We have a former First Lady who lettered in college football?
That is absolutely amazing. I love that. And I think it's one of the things I love about historical fiction is that a lot of times you learn so many interesting things about history that you would have never learned, because it's kind of this weird little side story that nobody talked about.
Yes.
And then, you know, and then it turns into this whole, you know, they have this whole other story that's just as important in history, but it's not the normal, what we talk about. So
yes, and that's what I love.
That.
Yes, I do too. You know, and that's what I liked about Tylene's stories. Nobody knew about her. It's like Hidden Figures or A League of Their Own, and some of these where people don't know, and then you find out, and it's so enriching. And that's how I see Tylene's story, and that's how I see Mamie's story. So now I'm going to write first person as a 19-year-old, not in first person as a 40-year-old, but now a 19-year-old. So the whole tone is going to be completely different. Her personality, she was really pretty funny and feisty, and we're going to see a side of her that we wouldn't have known in the 50s, you know, of what we know of her as in the 50s.
Right.
And so we're going to see her as a teenager.
So when you were talking about writing Tylene's story, you were talking about how you used music and playlists to get you into that moment. I know that is a common way that a lot of writers do writing, and a lot of them will create like playlists that kind of go along with their books. Is that something you're going to do for the new book as well?
Well, I've thought about it, but I haven't really decided, because, and it's really part of the reason why I was considering it as a playlist, is because she was a musician and she played the piano, and actually Dwight paid $5 a month to have a piano at their Fort Sam Houston 2-bedroom, I mean, not even 2-bedroom, 2-room quarters. And so it'd be interesting, I think, to put together a playlist of what kind of music she was playing all the time. Not so much the music of the era, but the music that resonated with her and what she enjoyed. And I see that somebody asked when the book's coming out. It's
Yes.
already out. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. You can find it's in 27 countries. It's been translated into a foreign language. You know, I mean,
I think that she means the Mamie Eisenhower book.
Oh,
Not
I'm
the
sorry.
current book.
That book. Okay, thank you for clearing that up,
Yes,
because I'm
yes,
trying
yes.
to look at it, the questions
Yeah.
fast and not lose train of thought. But the Mamie Eisenhower book, that is going to be dependent on how fast I work. and I haven't been working that fast lately. So I've got a lot of other balls up in the air, and so I haven't. I've gotten maybe 70 or 80 pages, you know, into it, but so I still have a way to go. But if you all put pressure on me, then, you know, that works too. So if you want to read it, you know, in 7 months, okay, I'll get it out there.
Well, I definitely think it's something that we want to read. So,
Good, I'd like to hear that. Thank you.
yes. But I can't imagine, with everything that's going on, how difficult that is to kind of marshal your creative process. And it also probably affects your ability to go and do research, right? It's not, it's not so easy to go and do that right now. Right.
But it's not easy to go and do that. But I'll tell you what, the San Antonio library, they weren't letting people in. You know, the library was closed. And so I sent them a list of what I needed, and they just sent it right back with all the links to the newspaper articles and everything. So that was even easier than Brownwood, and I thought Brownwood was easy. So, but with all that's going on, I do have to tell you that early on, you know, in the spring, I had been going so fast and so furiously because I've had speaking engagements, maybe up to, you know, averaging like 3 a week. And I was going out of town and, you know, all these things and flying here and there and all that. And then boom, it all stopped. And it was a transition for me, you know, so I kind of spent the next few months throwing a tennis ball against my backyard wall and learning how to play cornhole. And I wasn't really focused on writing and researching. So that kind of put it behind. After I kind of got out of that funk, then I started doing a lot of research, and then I started writing. But as I did with the Tylene story, I've thrown away many, many more pages than I've kept. And so, you know, I think I'd written the Tylene story, probably the first 100 pages, maybe, you know, 10 times, and the first 50 pages, probably 20 times, because then I just read it and I'm like, nah. And even though I maybe kept a lot of the same concepts, I just started over. So that's what's happening with me now. I've probably written 300 pages, but I have about 70 that I've kept. So that's what.
Are you a plotter or are you a pantser?
You know what? I'll say I'm going to work real hard this week. I'm going to produce 50 pages this week, and then with 5 hours left in the week, I produce the 50 pages. You know, I think it's the nature of being a journalist and on deadline. So I can write a lot really fast in a short amount of time, but I don't tend to write a paragraph here and a paragraph there and work every day and, you know, that kind of thing. I just sit at it and then I just go 100 miles an hour.
So talk about how being a newspaper writer, how different that is from writing full-length books.
Well, you know, I could tell a lot in this, you know, because I started when it was actually column inches, you know, not web pages, you know, or, you know, web stories that could be longer. So I had to learn how to write very succinctly. And I think that's probably why the novel is only like 240 pages, because I just am not, it's not in my nature to write these long. It's like, well, here's the story. This is what happened. This is what they said. Let me, you know, go into it. And I do write more in dialogue. If you read the book, you know, or you've read the book, there's a lot of dialogue. And I don't use maybe 2 pages to describe, you know, what the smell of the horses were. I just don't do that. And so, so I think that being a journalist and then becoming a novelist, I have learned to write fast and to write succinctly. And I eliminate a lot of words, because I'm used to, how do I say in 5 words that I could say in 15, but I need to say in 5. So, I've kind of, because I need to tell more and I only have 10 column inches or, something like that.
Right.
So it's taught me a lot about writing, but writing a novel is very different because it's not reporting. It's a little bit more storytelling, and I didn't want I didn't want the novel to read like an AP report, and so I found that I'm loving historical fiction, and I really wish I had discovered it a long time ago. I loved being a journalist. There's no qualms there, but I'm not 30 anymore, and so I'm not going to get to write historical fiction for the next 40 years, but I do love it, and I'm glad I discovered what it's like to write it.
That's great. So so we don't have any other questions.
There are a few things in the chat. There are a whole bunch of them, but you may have already
I think we're all talking about that the Maisy Eisenhower book. Give us the book.
Well, that's good, because Tylene's doing great, but I need Mamie to do great too.
Yes, so that gives you, I think, maybe some incentive for that you think that the next one will be really good. So since you've switched production companies with the movie, do you know, have they cast anybody else yet?
No, not yet. Because we actually, with the other, and I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but we already had another script. Another script had been written with that other production company. And so now I'm learning this lingo, but I guess it's considered now a sterile script or something like that. So, so even though they had people in mind for the other one, we're starting from scratch now. So, so I'm not even really sure who the producers might have in mind, but I'm hoping to have a Zoom call with them in the next week or so. Mm-hmm.
That is really exciting. I think as we kind of talked about everything that is going on right now in the world,
Mm-hmm.
the other kind of thing I really enjoyed about this book was that we don't see a lot of women from this time era that are doing more than, being homemakers. And I think it's really interesting to kind of bring into that discussion that
that's a gre't point. Yes.
that women have always kind of been doing some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
We just haven't always talked about them.
Right. Yes. It'll be nice to see a woman on the screen representing something that is so outside of that box, so to speak. And I got a question here about who, and then I'll go into that if there was anybody that I would. Yes. I mean, I there's so many wonderful, possibilities out there that it's kind of hard to pinpoint, but and she might not do it, and she might not be the right fit, but at times I have thought of Amy Adams. I thought that she would be both strong and also tender, and but maybe I'm wrong and she wouldn't be the best fit. But to answer that question, I think she's a wonderful actress, and she would be wonderful in any role. But there's somebody that's meant to be. That's just how I feel about it, and whoever it is going to do a fantastic job.
I love that.
But the thing about what you were asking me about in another role in that era, it's interesting because, when we think of the Rosie the Riveters and all that wonderful women that were doing incredible things, they were still going to factories and working. They weren't in the public eye. And what Tylene did, when we think of small town football, the football coach is often the face of the city, even more so than the mayor. And to see on a Friday night in the biggest gathering against another town, and your representative there on the sidelines calling all the shots as a woman, that's a different way of looking at it. And so to see a woman in that era, on film as the face, during that time, to me it just gives me the chills.
Yeah, I think it's very powerful.
Mhm.
So we have another question from the audience. Do you think, as you now consider your future writing as potential film projects, will it alter your approach?
No, I don't think so, because I think I have a style. I've discovered I have a style, because after I wrote Tylene's book and now I'm working on Mamie's, I have a certain style. And it's just the storytelling is the big piece. You know, it's like when I'm with my family and it's Thanksgiving and we're all sitting around a table and I'm trying to make everybody laugh and I'm telling them stories. That's what I love to do. And if they get picked up for film, that's just a bonus. Like I was saying at the beginning, everybody kept saying the film, and I'm going, but the book. I think my writing style, though, does lend itself to the visual. And so it's almost like I call it a book movie, because I make them short. You could read them in the amount of time it takes to watch a movie, and you could see it all as if it's on a screen. And so if that lends itself to future options to film, you know, that would be a bonus, but that's just the way I write. Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that what you just said about the way you write kind of makes it like a film. I think that that was kind of, you know, I could definitely kind of see as we went along, kind of it all unfolding. And so I definitely think that's actually, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it's really interesting to think that way. And someone is asking, will you come back and talk to us about it, the making of the movie, once the movie's made?
Yeah, I saw that. And I'm like, yes. Yeah, I'm my agent. I have a wonderful agent. She's with creative artists in California and CAA. And she knows, as we had when we optioned it originally, that I want to be part of the production crew. So in the original contract, I'm executive editor. See my newspaper. I'm executive producer. Sure. And we're going to be going for that again. So I'll be on the set and I'll have creative input. So I will absolutely, if you want me to come back, I will come back. You bet.
Yeah, I think that would be really fascinating to kind of talk about how the writing process evolves, and then how it evolves to be on the screen. So yeah, I think we would absolutely love that. That would be fabulous.
Yeah,
so,
and you know what's really interesting is that a lot of people have reached out to me, you know, producers and people. I've gotten to be really good Twitter private message and email friends with Roz from Frasier, you know, Perry Gilpin. It's awesome when I get an email that says, Perry has just sent you an email, you know, and I'm like, oh, I would love for her to be a part of the project. And so she's a wonderful human being and a terrific actress, and I just love Frasier, you know. And so so it's just interesting how you kind of tip your toe in, you know, into the waters, and then these things happen. And this is a world that is completely new to me. So I mean, when my husband and I, the day the book launched, it actually launched 2 years ago yesterday. And we're like, well, we're about to find out what's going to happen. And it's beyond my wildest imagination, you know, and I have a pretty wild imagination.
Well, and you know, you had kind of talked about, you know, we originally had you scheduled to do an in-person event back in March that was supposed to be part of this whole big citywide book festival. So, you know, I mean, I think we were really glad that we were able to kind of pivot and do something else. So we were so happy that you came today, and I hope everyone has enjoyed the event. And we'll definitely have Marjorie back when the movie is there. I think that's another really fascinating way to talk about how books move forward into our lives in other forms. So so thank you everybody for coming. We had a great time.
I can't believe that this is already over.
I mean, know.
I could keep going. I thought we were only about 10 or 15 minutes.
It's hard to believe it's
my sister, who has heard me for all these years, she'd probably go, no, it's over.
So we do have the book available in the library as well. So I actually am going to turn my library copy in tomorrow. So, and then we hope that you come back and see us for our next author conversation Saturday, November 7th at 4 p.m. with author Pamela Scholzvik about her new book, Forever 51, which takes the vampire genre and flips it on its head, and that the protagonist is 51 and has been a vampire and going through menopause for more than like close to 100 years. So I think it's a funny book, and we hope to have you guys come back. And thank you so much, Marjorie. This was wonderful, and enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy your family visit. So,
well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.